Fuck yeah, it's Monday morning, and I cannot believe those words just left my mouth given my work history and how long I've been part of the workforce. But fuck yeah, it's Monday morning, and the reason I'm saying that is simply because I can. I woke up this morning kind of after having a quote unquote long night of very lucid dreaming and a lot of lessons playing out within those dreams. I woke up this morning feeling extremely emotional. And the emotional spectrum there goes, of course, from one end to the other, because with every beautiful emotion, there's, a sad emotion. With every sad emotion, there's the counter good emotion and all that. Like the whole spectrum always lives there because you can be like, wow, I'm so grateful for this. And yet still look back and go, I can't believe how long it took me to find it. Or you can be sad about the loss of something and yet happy that it came into your life at all. And so there is the full spectrum if you allow yourself to just feel it all. And you can feel it going back and forth in your awareness as your thoughts go from one end to the other end to the other end. As long as you don't get caught on it, it's just constant process. It's just constant process and feeling. And then it's gone. And then it kind of tapers off as if it was like a storm. And it's such an incredible experience to just watch that happen. Because throughout all of that emotion, there were hundreds of reasons and feelings and memories and shit that came up. I just didn't grab onto any of them as the reason I was feeling what I was. Maybe a reason, maybe a contributing factor, but not the contributing factor. And I know even now, all of the things that I did think about and see and watch go by wasn't everything that was going by. Because I'm sure had I looked deeper, there would have been more behind it. And I know from experience that's the case. You pick one, dig into it, and you're lost, And that's it. It's like you're following the storm. That's when you get lost in it. It's because you're following it rather than just letting it pass. So this morning was a really interesting experience for me because it's like there's the experience of process and then there's our awareness of that process. And we can get lost in the experience, or we can hold on to our awareness, still have the experience, but not get swept away in it. I just wanted to share that quickly with everyone because I know sometimes we wake up and we feel a wash of emotions, sometimes from dreams that we aren't so lucid going through. And I know that. And then we're like, oh, it's got to be this reason and this reason and this reason. Just let the storm pass. Just relax. You'll be okay. And before you know it, it tapers off and your day can continue. And here we are with the Monday version of Raw.
Amen. And it's being gone through like every time that process, like when you're in it, it feels like that storm. It feels like I got to do something about this. Like I must have to do. It's so intense. And the need to feel like you're doing something with it. A lot of times the best thing you can do is just let it. It's the only thing you can do. Like trying to imagine actually going through a fucking rainstorm and thinking you got to do something about it to get rid of it. Right. Like I gotta, I mean, we do that too, though. We pray to gods and sun gods and rain gods and all that stuff just to feel like we're doing something about it, as opposed to just shifting our perspective of it. Like, oh, maybe my idea that storms shouldn't happen is a big part of my resistance, my experience to this right now. Like maybe it's all comes back to my perspective of what is going on, or my desire to settle upon a specific reason that something is happening, or something specific that I'm dealing with or going through, and thinking that I know that it means exactly what I think it means. And it's always just looking at a limited perspective of what's going on. And yet it is showing perspectives as well, for the things I go through. It's like I'm seeing, as much as it's like, oh, that's uncomfortable. So you don't have to look at this, don't have to deal with that, don't have to focus on that. I'm still seeing things in potential, And so it's not like oh, that isn't me. It couldn't be me, whatever, blah, 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 blah. It's like, oh, it's all me. And so it's almost been interesting, like seeing and being willing to see varying sides of myself. And as storms go through, understanding, oh, there's like something to be learned from the storm. It's not something to be avoided or a perspective to be dropped or shuttered or suppressed because, oh, that perspective doesn't make me feel comfortable. And as you're going through different storms or perspectives or shifts, like even recently, like the perspective of myself, like there have been times in the last couple of weeks where I felt like I was 15 years old again, like straight up. Like that part of me hasn't left. And so it's almost been reminding me in a sense of what that was like because, and I don't know if this is like that Mario levels example or what exactly, but it's like feelings that I thought weren't in there anymore, maybe perceptions of myself that I thought weren't in there. And meanwhile, it's just been things that I've, had a certain perspective on, thought I've convinced myself I've overcome, and then felt like I've been able to control away almost. And so it's been very interesting, like feeling those sorts of things again, and like some like very basic situations not feeling so basic anymore. Like, oh, this situation, like having a conversation, there's the potential to feel all different sorts of ways about that. There's the potential to have, a really difficult time. You can judge yourself for anything. You can feel like you're doing something wrong no matter what, thinking that there's a better way that you can handle a situation other than just handling it as you are. Like, where does this assumption that I can't handle something or can't deal with something, or my perspective on something isn't the best perspective? Like my perspective on something, oh, I gotta get other confirmation or guarantees or whatever. And so it's almost like the building faith in yourself and realizing, I absolutely have been over the years for sure. But there's also the side that's like, I don't know, was I just avoiding one perspective, focusing on another perspective, avoiding one perspective, building a more and more and more positive perspective that suppressed the negative perspective, or just unwilling to accept different sides of myself? And the idea that, yeah, and yeah, I know that's a bit of a, and it's not even a fucking tangent because we're just fucking talking about it, but going through and this right now, like being the storm, like you were talking about, like thinking that there's something wrong. Like I know there's something wrong with seeing more perspectives of myself, or feeling like I'm in a spot that I had overcome or gotten over, or like being just like more afraid of certain things than I felt previously. It's like there's more of an intensity of fear of certain things, whereas I know there's been spots in the last year that there was very little fear, and yet like I'm of course different and changed than I was a year ago, and like far more relaxed, but also far more, I don't know, open to seeing the sides. And so there's the potential for, I don't know, hesitation or fear. It's been interesting, like for certain things, I'm like, why am I afraid of that happening? Well, because that's in potential too. And I don't even really know how to explain it or what's going, and that's just it. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. and I never do.
And there's always something to fear.
Yeah.
There's always, trust me, there's a lot to fear. If you really want to look at it, lots. But why are you afraid? Because you're trying to protect something. What are you trying to protect? Something that you find valuable, or at the very least, your life. And that's worthy of consideration for sure, to a certain degree. But I mean, otherwise, what are you trying to protect? Your emotions? Are you trying to protect yourself from change? Are you trying to protect yourself from disappointment? Are you trying to protect your expectations? Are you trying to protect your illusions? That kind of thing. And so that's a different thing. But I wanted to go back to this idea that that we ever get over anything. And what I mean is that because we're never actually trying to solve anything, we're never actually getting over anything. We're just letting it go. We're just realizing, like, I don't need to get stuck on that, and moving on. Right? It's kind of like a fear of riding without training wheels. Right? If you stopped riding a bike for a very long time, and then you tried to ride a bike again, and I was like, here's some training wheels, and you became dependent on those training wheels, and I'm like, I'm going to take them away, you'd still feel the same fear of those training wheels going away. Right? Like, it's the thing. It's the same cycle if you had forgotten the cycle to begin with. So the point being is that that stuff's always in there. Why is it always in there? Because we are cumulative beings to a certain degree, right? And what I mean is that, again, there's the awareness of the experience, and then there's the experience of experience. And so it's kind of like the triune brain model, which is outdated now, right? But it is still very useful in the fact that it describes how the brain kind of evolved over time. So it described it as the reptilian brain, and then the mammalian brain, right? So you have your fight or flight, right, or fawn, or any of the new Fs that they've introduced, and then you have your human brain in terms of we're thinking more for ourselves. But what they're trying to say there is that one is very much built upon the other, in a way that an operating system is largely based upon a previous version of an older operating system doing something much more basic, right? And so every day of your life, every experience you've gone through, that hasn't gone away. Like, you can go back to when you were 15 and you can experience all the same stuff just by thinking about the way you thought when you were 15, just by putting yourself back in that position. Why is that? Because it's still in there. Why? Well, because you went through it. It's now part of all of the accumulated experiences that are in there, which means that if you look back, you can get lost in it. Right? But it's always there. You are the combination of all of the things coming up until now, which is really exciting on the one hand, because that means that depending on where you are in terms of your awareness, like if you are here in the moment at the crest of the wave, as it were, as it moves forward, then you are embodying all of the change that you can embody in this present moment, because you are the accumulation of everything you've done up until now, as well as the awareness of what's happening now, which has no limits whatsoever. So the crest of the wave is really where you're embodying the most change that you can, because you are literally change as it's happening. Dwelling on the past, though, it's kind of like you've moved back farther down the way, farther in the back of the wave. You're no longer experiencing all that change, right? Because you're getting caught in this stagnant idea of where you were, because it's still part of the wave. You passed it. It never stopped being part of the wave, right? Now it's just it's back there, because the wave is the whole goddamn ocean, right? It's not just the crest, it's everything that's left behind as well. And that's true for you and everybody else, is that we are not simply the crest that we can experience when we're being present, but we're everything that came behind too. And we can get lost in any of it. We can get lost in any of it. Or we can come back to where the wave is actually, happening.
Well said. Yeah. That idea of even just like looking back in the past as opposed to recognizing like that shit has happened and shifted me, and I'm just where I'm at right now. And so it's kind of been interesting for me, because admittedly, the initial thing, a couple years ago when I realized like, oh, imagining I didn't have a past, and it was very freeing and blah 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 blah. And it was, but it was not the full story, obviously. It was recognizing, oh, the narrative I'm telling myself isn't exactly what I am, because I'm here and now, and yet it still is informative towards everything. And like sticking to that one side allows for avoidance and a lack of responsibility sticking to that side. And so there's been more shift to the other side for me, where it's not so much about avoidance necessarily, but facing certain things. And in that realization, there was a freeing sort of comfort in that, okay, so the narrative I'm telling myself isn't me. It's never going to be me. It's never been what I am, but there's still a responsibility for everything I am. Because even though in that moment I realized, like, okay, maybe I'm not just this idea, doesn't mean, like, with that, if I'm really willing to sit into that, it means there's no thing that I'm not. There's no walls between what I think and anything. And so there's this like pull to look back on certain things, and there's certain things maybe you dig in. Yeah, even just digging into previous experiences maybe that you realize that you were avoidant of or not taking responsibility, and digging back into those is like allows you to face certain things and deal with certain things, but then it also opens up the doors to everything you've ever been through as well, as opposed to keeping all of it like, you know, at bay next to you. And so it I guess, yeah, I don't know, maybe it has opened up those doors a little bit, realizing, but it's been incredible because there's so much under the surface of those things. And I think it's a lot of that just like coming out now that maybe has been sort of suppressed, but it's there. Like that shit is there. Like our the weights that we feel when we're feeling a certain way and like, oh, not really sure why. It's like that could be coming from the depths of ourself. And we can't even see where it's coming from. And like, you got to feel it to realize where it's coming from. Like, I've spent so much time in my life wondering, like, God, where does this fucking anxiety, fear shit come from? And I know it's all in there for everyone, always in potential, but I've always wondered that. And I've always written it off just like, yeah, guess I'll never figure it out. And it's like, for the last, I don't know, few months, year, it's like been we're starting to realize more and more where that comes from, and see it, and seeing more previous experiences that initially was just like, oh yeah, I don't have to look at that, I'm just here, which is the same. Like, it's still the mentality that allows change to play out, but it's of course a balance. And it was like on a teeter totter being balanced, and I was just chilling on the one side, not realizing that they inform each other, but there's always the potential almost to get caught when you're digging into certain perspectives or seeing where things are coming from, to think that, oh, that's me now, and to pin myself to that experience, or fear that that is the entirety of me, as opposed to just realizing it's a component. And this is a part of the realizing of some of that deeper shit that I've always wondered where the fuck this comes from. And now it's like digging back in because I'm finally relaxing. It's like all that shit was able to be kept at bay because I was so fucking tense, and using control as my mechanism of experience, as opposed to a willingness to let go and just have faith in myself and just be where I'm at. It was always, oh, what's going to do something to avoid, do something to feel better, even the things that are deemed productive. There's still oftentimes mechanisms of avoidance, but it's been so anyway, it's been, the balance is interesting, uncomfortable, beautiful, freeing, all that stuff.
And intense. And intense.
Yes.
It's funny because I often kind of harp on this because it's something I do, and every time I get a glimpse of it, I'm like, "Oh, wow, I'm doing that again." And we do it a lot, but we really oversimplify our existence, right? Like, if you think about every insight that you've shared, it's driven by all of the experiences that you've had to have that insight, to lead you to that insight. So the insight is about what is, but the experiences were based on the illusion of division. So you have to go through enough experiences to come to a recognition of unity, and then you express it verbally. But here we are thinking that we're just expressing something here in the moment verbally, and it's just therefore coming from the moment, but it's not necessarily only coming from the moment. It's coming from all of the lessons that led us to the recognition that we're always in the moment. So whenever we're speaking, it's the past as well as the present reflecting, because we're speaking language, right? We're using concepts. We're using our experience of time to try and communicate what is, right? And so I just think it's interesting because we tend to think of ourselves as being here right now, but you are a four-dimensional being. You are not just who you are now, you are also everything that you were up until now. All of that time is what you are right now, and that's why you are so complex. And whenever you say something, hell, whenever you move your arm, you are moving your arm by virtue of everything you've learned previously in time about how to move your arm. So you're swinging the past every time you interact with the present without even recognizing it, because you are in fact the entirety of your experience. You're not just the Andrew you are right now. You're the Andrew, you're all of the Andrew that you can recognize being, and more if you can let go of just being Andrew. In which case now you can swing the entirety of the spectrum of perception and all of the lessons that go with it. It's interesting when you think about exactly what it is we're learning here. We think we're just learning to survive in the world, not realizing that we are in fact the world learning to be. We're experiencing reality. We're shifting as reality, and that includes the experience of time. It's really complex. We oversimplify it in the extreme, and I think that's a big part of our problem. We're like, why am I experiencing this? It's like, what, everything? Why are you experiencing everything? That's oh, well, let's sit and talk about that. I don't know if I've got a why, but let's just talk about what the fuck's going on, right? Because you are everything. You are everything. You're your entire experience, but you're the entire experience you've always been, which means that everything that you've experienced, every emotional spectrum that existed as an infant still exists now. And if you really want to see it, shake your world real fucking hard, and you will see yourself go right back to being a baby. You will go right back to wanting someone to hold you and tell you it's going to be okay. And that's it. And it's all still in there. It's all still in there. We just forget that because we get comfortable. We feel like we're in control. Right? But the whole emotional spectrum never went away. It never went away. If anything, it's just gotten bigger with each and every recognition that there's more to it, which is what growing up really is.
Yeah, they're like all like, oh man, because all of those perspectives are in there. Like that illusion that I'm on a timeline, like changing. I was this, now I'm this, now I'm this, now I'm this, now I'm this, as opposed to I'm this, I'm this whole thing. So of course it's all in there. And if we like, especially, in recognizing you're not just what you think, there's almost there's a benefit to maintaining all the perspectives, right? Like and I'm so quick to turn into like, oh, well, what's the benefit fucking cost analysis? How much am I giving up versus what is the benefit to all of me? What do I mean by me? Is it Andrew? Is it reality? Is it blah, blah, blah? Do I even know what the fuck Andrew is? But I think realizing and seeing that it's all still in there and realizing how much, because from the side, because deal with plenty of different emotions. I focus on like, oh, I used to be anxious, but I also used to be way angrier, and I used to be way more aggressive with my response. I used to be way more sarcastic with people who annoyed me. Like there's so much that's in there, and I only like look back at certain perspectives. But like, yeah, I could just as easily talk about, if someone asked me about my story, talk about my shifting of my perspective of anger, how I used to get so angry that I couldn't even continue to function, or I would lash out, or I would, my sister would push my buttons when I was 8 years old, and I would fucking punch her as hard as I could in the arm, and just like angry shit, and that feeling of like rage. Like I can remember that, where it's almost like you totally lose control, like you are masked. And I forget that feeling. Like how funny it is that I'll look at one side or just keep telling this one specific story. Like my story of me is like this one little line when it's this entire fucking whole field of potential perspectives. Like I could tell a million different stories about myself just from my own perspective and how quick I am to avoid and all the other ones or just the ones that didn't maybe hit as deep. Like there's points that hit deeper. Those are the deeper memories. Those are the traumatic stuff. And that's what I focus my narrative on. But I could just as easily focus on any other perspective as well. And how much so anyway, so realizing all of those perspectives, feeling all of those things, like I have gained so much more empathy in the last few months, year, because I'm seeing things in myself that I was avoiding in myself. And so when I would see that in other people, I didn't even realize this. I would get frustrated. I would get pissed off because I was like, I've been through this. I know it. I know how to, I've managed my way through it. And so this is what you got to do, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Whereas it's like I've been getting thrown back into those experiences. And I have, oh my God, like the amount of the understanding and willingness to like see myself in other people, because that's the side of the spectrum initially that I didn't want to look at, was seeing myself in other people and how much that shifts our actions, our interactions, our perspectives, our conversations. And so being willing to look at those sides and see those sides, there's much more of an appreciation for the entirety of this experience, the dualistic experience. And like I was talking about maybe yesterday, like a few days ago, got super high and was like feeling very, very free and clear and great. Some shit came up and I was like, yep, it's time to face that, deal with that. And so been going through just a number of things and realizing a lot of different patterns of that I've had throughout my life that I'm looking at. And so of course, like looking at that stuff, I'm going to feel uncomfortable in other situations. There's like a looking at a lot of things that been avoiding, been not wanting to look at. And so yeah, like of course there's going to be discomfort in other situations because there's more willingness to not just continue to avoid myself, which is what a lot of it comes down to. But it's been yeah, it's been interesting to say the least.
And it will continue to change as you continue to go down the recognition that this is all you. Because what are you anxious about? What do you have to be anxious about that isn't the perspective of division? And so as that fades, it changes, right? I'll give a good example actually from the comment section right here. But then I get angry at other people for not being aware. It doesn't seem fair that I'm putting in the work to get better and they're not. I can recognize this. I spent a long time here. This is something I still feel if I think about it, for sure, from a certain perspective. That perspective being me and them. It's the only time I can get frustrated is when they're not me. Otherwise, it's just me interacting with another part of me. And again, I have this small, simple perspective of myself as just this right now here. And if I can't see how much of me is coming from my experiences of the past and how much of me is coming from what I can accept that I am, then I can't see how much of me is also everyone else. And as I start to see that more, my frustration with them starts to pass because I realize my frustration with them is my frustration with me. I'm putting in the work. What work? What work are you doing? Outside of self-acceptance, is that really work? Is this a contest? Right? It's all a perspective. I'm putting in the work. No, you're not. You're just accepting yourself. If anything, you're not doing as much work now. You're starting to relax. In which case the question is, why aren't you helping them relax? It's very much like, the perspective of potheads. Oh, they're a bunch of lazy stoners. Why? Why? They're probably doing work that you're not because they're relaxing and working on all the reasons that they can't relax. Right? So it really just comes down to what the perspective of what we're doing is, and who it is we think we're talking to. Who is it you think you're frustrated with? And that's the thing with me is that I finally started taking it easy on quote unquote others as I started realizing that it was just a reflection of my own impatience with myself. Why am I not out of my suffering yet? Why are you still fucking suffering? Who are you talking to? And that's it, is that just continue asking yourself who you're talking to. Continue to look at the recognition that you're really just working on yourself. You don't know where other people are. You don't know that their journey can't take a snap left turn and go in a direction that you can't even see. It's all assumption. It's all assumption based on how we need to see ourselves. And the more you get that, the more you just accept that, because it really is just accepting that. It's not getting it. It's just seeing it over and over and question it. Be skeptical. Do whatever you want. Be willing to look at it. Be willing to look at the possibility that maybe all you really know is you. If you take that far enough, it changes your emotional spectrum of everything. Everything. Because again, what are you afraid of? What are you angry at? What are you frustrated with? Because I guarantee it all comes back to you.
And that's the potential, like, it's both the potential for so much discomfort and so much freedom, depending on what you wanna settle about, like, what perspective you wanna have of that. Because if everything, and I can even hear, because it's interesting, like, early on in the podcast, it was a lot about, talking about reality, what's going on. It was very little looking at myself, at least in my conversation. Like, I use yeah, I know, and I don't even exactly remember everything we talked about. I'm just making a massive generalization and assumption right now, but but there was like a for me at least, it was a new thing, like the conversation. That's where I found my value, worth, getting better at understanding things, getting better at seeing, like, oh, I am just everything, reality, whatever. And then, but there's the back and forth with, or even that, but like, and maybe it's the realization there is nowhere to get, there is nothing to do. So that journey, there is no journey that you're on. And like resistance to that, because we're at a point now, 2 years into the podcast, like it started off with, I had a lot of questions every day. I'd come with like, oh, going through this, going through that, just tried mushrooms, talk about this, talk about that. And like kind of, we've talked about a lot of things, and we've talked in private about just how the things are shifting and changing. And I think there's a realization for me of both of the application, of the application, and the realization that, and again, like, yeah, who am I even talking about? Again, just focusing on myself and thinking about myself, but the thought of, oh, have I just entirely avoided allowing myself to just be myself for like my whole life? And again, it's like, no,
What do you think
because
you've
I'm,
been learning?
yeah,
That's really what
yeah,
it is. Again, our
yeah.
experience is divisive from the start. We are slapped in the face with the perspective of division, with the experience of division, and all the merry hell that goes with that, for sure. And it's completely immersive. But to be yourself is to recognize that the division isn't there. It's to actually just be in a state of being. That's not an easy lesson to learn, especially when all you know is division. Unity is not something that is easy to learn when all you are looking at is the perspective of division. Everybody wants to rush this process like it's just this place to get to. It changes everything. It changes everything. It's as much a part of the developmental process as maturity as a whole, as understanding your ego, understanding why you create so much conflict. But it's not, this isn't a 4-year course. This isn't a certification program. This isn't something that you'll just get. This is something that will continue to refine in your lifetime if you allow it to do so, if you continue to be willing to look, right? And that's only for your own reasons. Because again, what are you looking past? The conflict. You're looking past the contradiction. You're looking past the seeming opposites, right? And so that takes a long time to settle in because you should be doing it skeptically. This is why I get uncomfortable whenever, whenever anybody says, well, I understand we're all one. Stop that. You don't. I don't. Like, just stop. Because it's an unfolding thing that's so large and unfathomable that to even have the arrogance to say, I get it now, is nothing but a fucking ego boost. And it's unfolding because it's that fucking big and that contradictory to what it is we think we're experiencing. You really have to look long and hard to have those insights. You really have to be willing to get out of the way. It is a long, lifetime process, one that I have embraced wholeheartedly for over half my life, and I will only ever feel like I'm ever scraping the tip of the iceberg. So don't rush the process. Don't think you should be moving along faster than you are right now. Enjoy what's being revealed to you right now by yourself. Enjoy what you're allowing yourself to see and recognize that it leads to more shit if you're willing to let it. Or you can hold yourself back going, what, I should be seeing it all by now. No, and you don't want to.
Yeah, and that's the side. Like, I admit that I felt like I was on that. Like, oh, I kind of get it. As much as I'd say, like, nothing to get, nothing to whatever. There was still like an underlying sort of feeling of boosting, like feeling better. And recently, I'm like, I don't know if I get fucking anything about anything ever. It's like, oh, that's kind of it in a sense. Like, yeah, like thinking that I get anything gets in the way. Like it is, and how much, oh God, when I'm feeling more relaxed, kind of clear about things, not so in my way about stuff, I realize like, oh, it really is just about relaxing. Like it isn't like, because there isn't a spot to get to. Like there's not a spot to get to. It's this right now, but there's a lot to it. And I finally am even seeing the side, and it's been appreciated of like hearing someone say, "Oh, I see myself in everyone," and immediately being like, "Yeah, but they're not me. What do you mean? I'm me." And it forces you, if you're willing to look at, well, what do I mean by me? What do I mean by that? Because as soon as you're like, no, that's not me, you got to ask, well, who am I? Like, what do I think I am? And if that's willing to be looked at, then it's what's left. But to jump to being like, oh, you're me, that's me, I'm you, blah, blah, blah. It's like you can very much just say that shit and maintain a perspective of yourself. Because if you have a solid perspective of yourself, you can't see if that's you, then that can't also be you. And if you're sure of that, like it can't, you can't really have both. And so it's funny with the statement, like, oh yeah, we're all one, we're all one. Yeah, I get that. Like when you said that, I at the same time, I was like, I don't get that. I don't get that at all. Cause it's not like how much there can be the utilization of that and that sort of conversation, understanding whatever, be like, yeah, I get this. I'm doing something right. I'm feeling good. I get something. Oh, I'm having deeper conversations. That's kind of like, you absolutely can build an ego around that. That's all of fucking spirituality, basically, is it turns this into a, uh, what's the term? Like a, not a job, but vocation. It turns this realization, this conversation into a sort of vocation. And instead of, oh, I'm a, accountant, I'm a, pizza delivery person, I'm a spiritual person, as opposed to I'm myself. Like it's just another sort of label. And I'm realizing how much I attached to that and made that about like, it's what I talk about, what I'm about. And I'm realizing like, what the fuck? Like there was a point before I ever posted on any sort of social media where, I'd been sort of getting into meditation, would talk to some people about that here and there, but was never known as just, Andrew. And I still, to assume that I know what I'm known as now, but there's like this maybe possibly and potential an idea that like, oh, I'm a spiritual person, talk about these things, understand these things. And like I attached to that as well, and now I'm like, "No, that's not me either." Like, I'm not a fucking spiritual person. I'm not a good person. I'm not a bad person. But I'm all of them. And so when it comes to social media, it's been funny how much like even you told me last year when I was in Costa Rica, I made that drunk cooking video, or I made that like I don't know, burrito wrap thing. And you were like, honestly, that was one of my favorite videos that you've ever posted. And I was like, oh yeah, he must have just like thought it was kind of funny because like that's not my normal content. But I'm realizing more and more how, even though, yeah, I was a little tipsy, I'd been out, like I was just doing something for the sake, sharing something for the sake. And that's what that was, as opposed to here's an insight, here's another insight. Oh, let me explain and articulate this very well. And so there's been such an attachment. It's been like a crutch for me, quote unquote, the conversation, as opposed to just fucking life, just fucking being myself. It's been a way almost like, it's like a means of avoiding being myself, and yet it's still being myself. It's still informing. It's like, it's just, again, thinking about myself, thinking like, because then there's the assumption, oh, I'm not being myself when I'm doing that. And it's like, so you think you know how to be yourself? That's cute. That's funny. It's like, when have you ever done that? Like, let me figure out how to be myself, put it into ChatGPT, explain that. All right, there we go. That's how to be myself. I'll start doing that. No, it's not that at all. It's just being willing to act without hesitation, stumble, fall, make mistakes. That's been a big one that I've fought now. Probably comes a big part from school and whatnot, but that's a deep one for me. Resistance to looking like fucking looking silly even is, and that's what freedom is though. Like the freedom to just make mistakes, stumble without concern. I've realized that before, but it's not about being perfect or relax all the time or, you know, everything fucking buttoned up. About being buttoned down and chilling with the buttons down. But anyway, yeah, it's very, again, just interesting process.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like really young children, right? Like the reason really young children up until like the age of 5 learn so fast is because they spend no time telling themselves they can't. Could you imagine trying to learn how to walk for the very first time with the mentality that we have learned in our adult life? We'd get up, fall. We'd get up, fall. We'd be like, fuck it. I need some help. Bring me a wheelchair or something, right? Like, and we judge ourselves. I'm weak. I can't do it. It's like, no, just keep doing it. This is how you learn. This is how you get there. And anybody who's ever learned anything understands repetition, but you won't do that repetition if you're judging your progress. You won't do it if you're making it about you, because then each and every time you do it, it means so much rather than just throwing another fucking log on the fire. And that's all we're ever doing is we're just going through the experience of revealing what we are, what we're capable of, and how much we can get in our way. We really are revealing our own potential all the time. That's all our life has been. That's all our life has been. That's all we're doing here. It's so funny because I said before you recently left to Europe for 2 weeks that this would be really good for you. And the reason was because you wouldn't be having this conversation. Because this conversation is meant to be an extension of your life. It's not meant to supplement your life. Your life is supposed to inform this conversation, because as soon as it becomes spiritual concepts, as soon as it becomes a philosophy, as soon as it becomes an intellectual exercise, you may as well just go jerk off. Like it really doesn't do anything for your life except make you feel good in the short term, and more, separate you from everybody else because they're still trying to figure out their fucking life. And that's why Dualistic Unity, this podcast, has always been just an extension of me trying to figure out my own shit. Right? Which is why I go off about things, like spirituality and whatnot, because these are things that I got caught in. These are things that took me forever to pull away from. And man, was there ever a fucking outcry when I did. I remember when I first started recognizing that this isn't spirituality at all. That this has nothing to do with the quote unquote spiritual. This has nothing to do with the metaphysical. This has nothing to do with any of that. It kind of does. I mean, if you're looking at the concepts, but the reality of it is that it has everything to do with you, just you. And nobody can tell you how to connect with that. Nobody can tell you how to reveal that. Nobody can tell you how to come to peace with that. No one. So it's just you. If there's a religion, it's a religion of one, which is why religion means to bind together. What is it binding together? You. It can't be somebody else's religion, see? It can't be somebody else's structure. It can't be your words, Andrew. It can't be my words, because they're not our words. They're just words. We're just expressing everything that's come before now to now. We're experiencing the crest of the wave. And what's fun about that is we don't know where it's going or what it'll do, all the ripples that happen as a result. But we do know all the fucking drag that happens when we get caught up with where we've been. And that's it. It's just the experience of that. It's just the recognition of that there is drag, and then there is the experience of freedom. And what are you doing there except learning how you work? I find it funny because in Discover Transcendence, I talk about metacognition, which is a really fancy word for just thinking about how you think, right? To just have a moment of clarity about, oh, that's interesting. When I expect too much, I get frustrated. Like that isn't the most clear thing in the world, right? Oh, when I build things up in my mind, like it's measuring my value, I get nervous about it. Shit like that. And we never think about the equations of our mind like that. We never think about how one thing leads to the next, but it's everywhere, right? And that's really all we're doing is we're just getting a real clear view about the workings of this experience, of this existence, if you are willing to just sit and watch it, right? But as soon as we make it personal, we get lost in that storm again, right? And then we try to figure out our way out of that, and we just keep following the storm instead of just recognizing that they pass. You see, that's the thing, is that we get so caught up in the storm itself, we don't recognize that it is an extension of a larger weather pattern. It's very much like life would have been before we had satellites and the weather network the way that we do now. Like before we knew where the weather was doing, what it was doing everywhere at once based on satellite mapping and all that. Could you imagine trying to fathom where the storm came from? Could you imagine trying to understand all of the contributing factors to all of the breezes going in different directions and all of the shit that the storm was doing? You'd never be able to. Even now with satellites, we can't conceptualize it. Even now there's pressure. That's why we're never totally right on the weather, right? Because there's so many contributing factors. And yet we think that the emotions that we're going through right now are easily explained with the narrative that we come up with in a knee-jerk response out of fear. It's the same thing primitive people used to do. It's like, oh, the storm is here. The gods are angry. That makes me feel better.
How fucking massive, ridiculous of an assumption that would be to think. And yeah, great example. Because even like it's funny how we feel like we're in so much control, and yet even the weather, like we can't, you can look at your weather app, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to play out. Oh, and how interesting it is because we're so used to having that control. Like if it doesn't say rain and then it rains, people are like all up in arms as opposed to just willing to shift with it, roll with it. And yeah, fuck. Do the same exact thing with my own shit. And there's no fucking satellites beeping and measuring that shit. Oh, how's this gonna go? How long is this gonna last? How's this gonna be? How intense is this gonna be? Whatever. And so storms come and go, And it is as if there's no means of measuring it or understanding it. And so even realizing that, it's like, "Oh my god." And the thought that I could know what it means or what it's doing or what's happening. It's like picturing a storm where you don't have the weather app or some means of measurement, like making an assumption would be ridiculous. Like, what's that going to do? Oh, it's going to fuck on my experience right now for sure, as opposed to just being like, all right, it's raining, gonna shift, gonna do, maybe go inside, maybe enjoy the rain, maybe do this, do that, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, oh my gosh, so used to having to plan things around it. And if whatever happens shouldn't be happening, and how quick I am to make that assumption with things that I'm dealing with or going through. And the amount of times that I fucking like will go through something, come out, look back and be like, oh wow, well, that was necessary. That was vital. There a great appreciation for that. A lot of things learned, a lot of perspectives gained. And yet, you're in it and you're like, what the fuck? Well, this shouldn't be happening. I wish this wasn't happening. All of these things. And so it's funny how we do that, but interesting. And it's just kind of a part of it too. Like part of that is part of going through the shit as well. Is like it's not quite as deep of shit if you realize that, it's not something about what's happening. If you realize like, oh, there's going to be a point where I look at this and realize, oh, there was a lot to be gained there. And even realizing that right now, I'm like, oh, fuck, that does always happen. That literally always happen. And it's immediately like a little bit lighter because there's almost an underlying appreciation for whatever it is that's being processed right now, whatever it is, all that desire to, oh, where does this come from? Where does that come from? It's like, motherfucker, you're learning where that shit comes from right now. And you're thinking that it shouldn't be happening. Like this was something that at one point you like kind of wanted in a sense, but and going back to the point on the reality, like getting caught on the conversation, just like the reality of things playing out and it not being about the conversation basically at all. Like there was what I'm realizing now too is with and just living my life, this being sort of an extension of my life as opposed to the entirety of my life, because that's been kind of how I feel about it. There's been almost, because if this is it, it's not something else. Like my personal process of learning, shifting, changing, there was like this strange, I don't even know how to describe it, like this strange avoidance of the recognition that it does take practice to learn something. Like it does take reps to learn something. And that's when things get applied. It was like, and again, just making assumptions, but it part of it is turned into an avoidance of that, of shifting, of changing, of stepping into something new, realizing that that's in process and being willing to allow that to play out. Like I almost thought of things as there is no practice, there's no reps. It's all just where I'm at right now. It's like, of course, to dig into
The only way
something.
to do the rep.
Exactly. Like, of course, it's got to be a practice. And then, but I don't even know what exact perspective I have, but it's like, oh, I'm already what I am. I don't have to do anything. I'm already good where I'm at. Don't have to learn anything new. Don't have to try anything new. And so I don't know, it's like turned into an avoidance of
Well,
stepping
that's the
into things.
paradox. That's the paradox, right? Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying is true, and what you're working through is all the reasons you think the opposite. So you see, the only way for you to learn about what you are now is to go through that process. But the only way to do that is to say, I'm doing it now. Now is the only time I can change. Now is the only time I can change. This is the only time I can change. But I'm still changing, right? Like I've still been changing, but the more I'm willing to change now, the more efficient I am at changing. The less I say it changes over time, the more I'm changing. But I put change off. I tell myself it's a process. I'll get there eventually instead of just making it now a priority. And that's why I mean, like, they're both true. Yes, there are reps, but those reps will take fucking longer if you think to yourself, oh, there are so many reps. Instead of this one rep changes everything.
Yeah, well said. That paradox of, and that realization, and you can almost focus on, oh, it's just right now, it's a process, or it is a process, and therefore, because it's a process and it's this big thing, I don't know if I can handle that. And it's like, no, it's just right now. And it is so fucking paradoxical. I'm just realizing, like, oh shit, because it is the only spot that it does change is right now. It doesn't mean that it's not going to play out, but it doesn't play out over time from maintaining the perspective that it plays out over time. It's like, just because that's the reality of how it plays out, just because you're in process or quote unquote making progress or working through something, doesn't mean that you're not just this experience right now. And if you settle on one side or the other, it negates the paradox, because it is both and neither always. And so there's almost been, and then it's been because, and it just does come from self-judgment, like avoidance of stumbling, of falling, of, realizing learning something new, gonna suck at it for a bit. And as much as I can talk to someone, someone at the retreat, we're playing pool, they never played before, and I'm like having a great time. They're trying it new. It's like, there are lots of things that, and again, there's lots of things that I have stepped into, new things, certainly. But there's also things I've almost been able to avoid, or convince myself I could avoid, because like I don't have to do it. I don't like, and yet it is still coming, a lot of times coming from a fear or a concern. And so there's been a negation of just things being a process, like me being in process, and like a focus on how I'm feeling now, as opposed to letting go of that shit, realizing things are in progress, things are in process, things are playing out. And at the end of the day, I don't have to fucking make everything about myself. Like, that is a fucking vicious animal, making everything about me. Like, every goddamn thing. And if you're focused on yourself to any degree, like, you're kind of making the experience, the situation about you in a sense, or at least for yourself it is, as opposed to just being experience, being what it is, and just like having fun with it too, because you can learn something new, fucking suck at it for a while, and still have a lot of fun doing it. Just because you're not good at it doesn't mean you have to be frustrated about it. You can actually enjoy it. And it's funny saying that out loud, because it's like, yeah, no fucking shit. But part of me kind of holds on to that perspective, that I got to be frustrated, angry, and then that turns into a fear of doing it, and just an entire avoidance of the whole fucking thing. But it's like, you're always doing something. Might as well try that. Might as well chip away at yourself. Let yourself, you know, hang loose.
Which is what is happening every time you relax, right? That's really like, okay, we're going to simplify all of this. It's so funny because we beat ourselves up for getting caught up in the past, or we beat ourselves up for getting caught up in thoughts, not recognizing that processing of the past and thoughts and everything else, that's always happening. It's always happening. You can't get out of it. If you were to get out of it, you'd basically be in a coma. Like this is what your brain's processing all the time, is everything you've ever been, everything that you are, everything you've seen, everything you can imagine, everything that you open yourself up to. Your brain's always processing stuff constantly, right? And so what we're saying, especially in this episode, is that you can be in reality, this experience right now. That process will still be happening. You don't have to focus on it, though you will be informed by it. And you can just continue on with your life. You don't have to be judging your progress. You don't have to be measuring your value. You don't have to be comparing to assumptions. You don't have to be doing any of this. You can be simply informed by all of the experience that you've had in this experience now and continue to live your life that way. But we like to beat ourselves up. That's ultimately what it is. And the question is, why? Why do we like to beat ourselves up? And I know immediately the ego is like, because I'm a piece of shit. Because obviously I'm a bad person. I have issues. I have problems. I need help. It's like, no, it's because it's the easiest way to guarantee that you keep thinking about yourself. And you'd think it'd be positive thoughts that would be way more enticing, but the negative thoughts are the ones that pull you in the most. They're the ones that seem the most real because they're the ones that you're afraid of. Right? And so our fear is a convenient scapegoat from the responsibility of just being what we are and having faith in that. And that is the intensity that you're experiencing at the crest. All of the considerations that go into every experience that you have, because you're not distracting yourself, you're being in them. And every experience you have is being informed by every other experience you have had, or every other experience you're open to seeing, because you have that ability as well. And it's just that. How much are you overthinking it? Which is why I have consistently said, keep it light. And this is what I mean by keep it light, is to recognize that the weight is only heavy if you perceive it as heavy. The alternative is to recognize what is, which is right now, which is only where you are. And there's nothing going on right now. If there is, I'm not sure why you're listening to the podcast, frankly. Go and deal with that. But aside from that, as soon as you do, then you're back. That's it. As soon as it's dealt with, then you're back here and now. It really isn't that difficult. It really is. As we said in season 1, and this is something that this conversation reminded me of, it's a one-step process. It's a one-step process that you take over and over and over again. But if you look at it that way, the more you look at it that way, the less you're taking that step with your full awareness. And that's the paradox. How much is this moment your entire existence? Because that's how much it changes your entire existence.
Because that's all we're ever realizing, right? Is how entire this moment is, like how this is that full fucking pie chart. My life is nothing but this, and all of the reasons that I had to think that it wasn't, it all stems from here. Like all of my experiences stem from this moment, all of the perceptions, all of the things that we go through and been through and have dealt with and still deal with. Like we're doing it now. And so it's like, of course you can just keep living your life. Of course, that's the only fucking thing you've ever been able to do. And it's just doing it with your eyes open or your eyes shuttered. Your eyes open, your eyes, uh, fucking squinting a little bit, right? Like, yeah. And when you open up your eyes, like there's a lot of stuff there, like so much, and so then, as you said, it's like you start looking at it. Straight up is pulling your clothes out from under your bed, starting to fold them up and put them away. And then, if you're like, oh, I'll finish some of those later, it's like, all right, you're still going to feel the clothes there. Like you still, and that's the thing. And that's where I think a lot of our, and yeah, I mean, it probably runs pretty fucking deep. Our collective weight is means of avoidance of reality, of like this not being a divided experience, this being all being you. Like how much, of course, like I talk about mechanisms of avoidance that I've had and I'm finally like fucking coming to terms with and looking at and facing and dealing with and pulling the clothes out and realizing how informative it is, how much it does go hand in hand with my experience with being free. And so even the thought of, the cliche like, oh, life is suffering, humanity is suffering. It's like it doesn't have to be, but there's a lot of things that we avoid and suppress to almost guarantee that it will be some degree. So, yeah, you can keep avoiding certain things. You're gonna be feeling all the things. And as I, work through dealing with things, facing things, realizing very, very uncomfortable bits about myself that I've been avoiding or not wanting to look at, like the experience starts to shift. Like there's changes that come with that in my perspective because yeah, you leave your room messy and you walk out the door doesn't mean that the room's not still messy. Doesn't mean that it's not still exactly the way that it is. It's just like you were just avoiding it. And so I mean, obviously that runs deep with maintaining this perspective of other, like, I mean, the depths of it being this not there being nothing but you. So that there's even just to have experience, you can't experience unity without duality. Like there's almost a mechanism of avoidance there to some degree. And so with that though comes the personalization of everything. If I'm unwilling to avoid that it's all me, I'm going to think something means something inherently about me. And no, this is just my experience. It's just I'm going through, I'm dealing with this shit. And it's like, who the fuck are you talking about? Do you think it's really just you having this experience right now? Because if you think it is, then it's all of the weight of all of that is going to come on fucking this. It's going to run fucking deep. But if you're even in, because there's a lessening of that, and it goes back and forth with the freedom responsibility, but also the realization that it's not just, it is just me going through this, but not just this divided me going through. So of course it's all of me going through this. If you're willing to see that or just not take it so goddamn personally, because it isn't. And then there's more of an appreciation for the things and for the influence or just response to a given situation. But yeah, I mean that avoidance exists on a massive spectrum that runs really, really, really fucking deep.
Yeah, I want to say quickly because we have about 5 minutes left here. And for anybody wondering, we do these groups 5 days a week. So if you'd like to join us on the screen, do so at patreon.com/dualistic unity. We're going to be continuing at the top of the hour for another tier one call today. Uh, Loneliness. It's funny because I talk to people a lot about the experience of loneliness and all the self-judgment and self-loathing and narrative that goes with the experience of loneliness. And I'll tell you right now, and this is a great way to end the episode. I am happier than I've ever been ever in my life. And what I mean by that is I'm not always happy, but even when I'm not, I'm getting something out of that. Right. And what I mean in my life is that I didn't get over loneliness by trying to avoid it. I got over loneliness by sitting in it until I recognized where it was coming from, by understanding it. And the only way to do that was to sit in it without judgment long enough to recognize that it stemmed from a perception, that it wasn't something wrong with me, that it didn't indicate something was wrong with my life. It didn't indicate any of those things. But because of the perception and my willingness to view myself as the perceiver, I could get stuck in it real easy. Right? Loneliness is just a response. There are other responses to being alone. There is no response at all, for example, in which case you are just being what you are. Because that's it. You asked me this at the first retreat when it hit you in the face that this is really just all you. How do you deal with being alone? I said by recognizing it doesn't change anything. Right? Like you have always been all there is. It's just that you've been so caught up in a small idea of you that you told yourself everything else couldn't possibly be part of it. But you've always been whole. You'll always be whole. There is no more whole that you can become. which is nice. But there is the process of letting go of all the shit you told yourself about the fact that you can't be whole, won't be whole, aren't whole, and are separate from everyone else. Because you've been doing that for a long time and you've invested in those thoughts. And so, while it is true you can only ever let them go now, right now, there is a bit of a process of letting them go now, just because of how many times you've created them now and how much you are still creating them now in multiple different layers to back up other assumptions that you've also been holding on to. And so, this is why it's so important to recognize if you were to question all of it, everything that you believe in, everything that makes you feel secure would all collapse from underneath you and it would terrify you. Just enjoy the process of your intelligence, knowing that it should be done one step at a time. And those steps will seem smaller the more you're willing to give into your fear of the process, of being the process, because then it's kind of like you're tiptoeing your way because you're afraid of where it goes. Let go of the fear, and those steps come way faster, and and the bites out of that giant pie become way bigger and more delicious. I just wanted to mention, it's just because you're not afraid to try it, and by try it I mean be here, to actually be at the crest of the wave. It's just faith, not faith in something, because there is nothing to have faith in. Just faith as an exercise rather than doubt as an exercise, because that's what we've been practicing. And we know where that goes. See, that's the thing. Like, we all know where fear and doubt and judging ourselves go. We know we're experiencing it right now in our lives. Where does faith go? Because if trying to control is making this fucked up, well, then I'm just letting go and see where that goes. And I'm telling you right now, from 20 years or 20 plus years of letting go, it's fucking miraculous. You don't know where it's going. You don't feel like you're in control. There's lots of things that make you afraid, but that's true now. And most of the time you're only afraid when you think you can be in control. And then you're like, well, I'll see what happens. And it works out in one way or another, and you roll with it. And you find that you are so good at rolling with it that you never ever have to feel like you're in control, because you are enough in yourself to deal with every moment that you're in. You are, because you are the moment itself and everything that led up to it.
Yeah, well said. Because yeah, like, oh man, if I stop being the one criticizing the every move or thought, like, it's not even. It's been so funny too, because and that shift, it's like, yeah, it's shifting from tiptoeing through change, keeping it at bay, to just like, fuck it, I'm going, and starting to like fucking run through it, and it's just myself, own hesitation, own thoughts, because like it's so interesting, and we talked about this recently too, like how when I catch, even yesterday, I was saying, like, catch myself talking, thinking about myself. It's like I'm the one maintaining that story right now, right? Like I'm the one holding on to that one little unique story, as opposed to just seeing how things play out. And without so much of that hesitation, it's not even about how it goes. There's going to be, you start running, you're going to fall, you're going to stumble when you're not used to running, when you're used to taking tiny little 1-inch steps or 2-inch steps, or just fucking stopping and sitting on a bench and like, I don't know if I can do this for a very long time. Then when you start running, it's going to be a new experience. Like it's like learning to walk again. Like it's that process is so reflective of everything we're doing. But a lot of people will just think they have done enough and chill on a bench, and definitely realized I've done that just because it's almost more. I was gonna say more comfortable, but it's not. Like there's discomfort in fucking everything. You might as well just fucking run through it, jump through it, go for it. Cause I haven't experienced that discomfort as much. And I'm kind of curious what it's like, because I know this discomfort pretty well, of the hesitation, the doubt, and that discomfort. But the faith has a discomfort in itself that is yeah, it's just different. Might as well, right? Might as well give that one a shot.
Absolutely. And in doing so, remember that that's the kind of faith that a baby bird experiences when it jumps from the tree for the first time. It's terrifying, but it's the beginning of freedom, right? Without that fear, without that terror and that risk, that willingness to just let the bottom drop out from under you, as it were, you can't fly. And that's the benefit. Not to anyone else. It doesn't matter if they see you flying, but you're flying, right? Which isn't a safe thing, but it doesn't need to be. It is enough in itself. This has been a fantastic episode of Raw. We're going to continue in 15 minutes on patreon.com/dualistic unity. 5 days a week we do this. There's a free trial available if you'd like to join us. We are that confident that you're going to fucking love it. And if you don't know, by the way, we also host retreats. We've got our biggest retreat coming up on November 11th in the Netherlands. We are very excited about this. There are still, I think, 12 tickets left. And there's going to be a total of 34 guests there. So there's a little bit more room. Do get involved now. The details are on our website, or just get in touch with us on Patreon. We're happy to answer your questions there. Talk to you soon, everyone.